You wake up to the sound of a jet engine, and you can almost smell the fuel in the air. For most of your life, that fuel has meant one thing: oil pulled from the ground, refined in giant plants in Texas, Saudi Arabia, or somewhere else far away and powerful. Now imagine the camera dropping down from that airplane to a quiet field in Ghana. No refineries, no smokestacks, no drilling rigs, just rows of bamboo gently swaying in the wind. It looks ordinary. If you drove past it, you might not bother taking a picture. But on that same patch of earth, Ghana is preparing to build something the world has almost never seen before: a $1.3 billion biorefinery that turns bamboo into high-value fuels and chemicals. Sustainable aviation fuel for planes, renewable diesel, green building blocks for the chemical industry, all from a plant many people barely think about. For most of the 20th century, Ghana's story in the world economy was simple: ship out cocoa beans and timber, buy back chocolate and furniture at a higher price, export raw materials, import finished goods, repeat the cycle. This new refinery is an attempt to flip that script. Take a local resource, process it at home, sell the finished product on Ghana's terms. That is the ambition. But a bigger, more uncomfortable question sits underneath it. When a humble bamboo stalk becomes the foundation of a $1.3 billion project, who really wins? The farmers? The country? Or the people somewhere else who control the technology, the capital, and the global markets this refinery will depend on? To answer that, we need to slow down and walk through what is actually being built. Somewhere not too far from those bamboo fields, Ghana has given a green light to what is called the Amaaba Bio Refinery Complex. On paper, it sounds like something you might expect to find in a European industrial zone or an American research hub. In reality, it is rising from Ghanaian soil, funded and developed by a partnership that brings together a local industrial developer and global technology companies. The numbers alone are striking: $1.3 billion in planned investment, a facility designed to process vast amounts of bamboo every year and convert it into products that are not simple commodities, but advanced fuels and chemicals. Sustainable aviation fuel for airlines under pressure to reduce emissions, renewable diesel for trucks and buses, bioethanol, green naphtha, for fuel, industrial lignin, and more. In other words, not firewood, not charcoal, but the very ingredients of a modern, low-carbon economy. Behind the scenes, there is a web of players: a Ghanaian-based industrial developer determined to prove that high-tech industry can live on African soil; international partners like Honeywell, bringing in technology to turn bio-oils into aviation fuel; and a specialist biorefining company providing a process for breaking bamboo down into sugars, chemicals, and fibers. Each piece of the puzzle says the same thing: this is not a pilot project or a demonstration plant. It is meant to be full-scale, commercial, competitive. The Ghanaian government has not been shy about how it frames this move. Officials talk about the refinery as a turning point, a signal that Ghana is done sending cheap raw materials out and begging for loans in return. Instead, the message is: we will refine our resources here. We will innovate here. If the world wants what we make, it can come to us. It is a powerful idea, especially on a continent that has spent so long trapped at the wrong end of global value chains. If you are watching from the United States, you have seen similar hopes before. Countries announcing big projects, promising to leapfrog into the future, only to stumble when the realities of money, management, and markets catch up. So it is fair to ask, before we get swept up in the excitement, why bamboo? In a world obsessed with solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, and electric vehicles, why would Ghana place such a large bet on an old-fashioned plant? To understand that choice, it helps to get close to bamboo itself. If you have ever stood in a bamboo grove, you know it does not shout for attention. It is tall, slender, and quiet. Yet underneath that calm appearance, bamboo is one of the fastest growing plants on Earth. Some species can shoot up nearly 3 feet in a single day. Once established, it regenerates from its own root system. You do not have to plow and replant each season. You cut it and it grows back. In a country like Ghana, that matters. Much of the land has been pushed hard by decades of farming, logging, and charcoal burning. Soils that once were rich have become tired. Hillsides that held forests now erode in heavy rains. Traditional cash crops like cocoa and maize are vulnerable to global price swings and climate stress. Bamboo offers something different. It can thrive on marginal land, hold the soil together with its deep roots, and keep producing year after year with relatively modest care. For years, researchers quietly noted that Ghana has naturally occurring bamboo resources and an ideal climate for growing more. Some projects experimented with bamboo bicycles, furniture, and small-scale products. Others trained women's cooperatives to cultivate bamboo and turn it into crafts or basic building materials. Those efforts proved that the plant could support livelihoods, but they stopped short of changing the national economy. The Amaaba project operates on a very different scale. Instead of asking, "What can we make today with bamboo?" the developers asked, "What could bamboo become if we plug it into cutting-edge biorefinery technology?" The answer is where science and strategy meet. Modern processes can take a bamboo stalk, break it into fibers, sugars, and other components, and then recombine those into fuels and chemicals that sell for far more than raw bamboo ever could. Just as important is timing. Around the world, airlines are being forced by regulation and public pressure to cut emissions. They cannot electrify jets anytime soon, so they are hungry for sustainable aviation fuel. Manufacturers are under pressure to clean up their supply chains. Governments have written climate targets into law. Everyone is scrambling for reliable sources of renewable feedstocks that do not compete with food crops. Bamboo fits that need in a very attractive way. So at one level, Ghana's bet on bamboo is simple logic. It has land that needs restoration, communities that need income, a plant that grows quickly, and a global market desperately searching for exactly the kind of products this plant can help create. But that still leaves a more human question sitting in the middle of the field. When this refinery is up and running, whose lives will actually be transformed? Who will feel the change in their hands, their wallets, and their hopes? When you hear about $1 billion project, it is easy to picture steel, concrete, and machines, not people. Yet if you zoom in, the story always begins with someone very ordinary. Imagine Ama, a 45-year-old farmer in Ghana. For most of her life, she has grown cocoa and maize on the same land her parents worked. Some years are good when rains come on time and prices hold steady. Other years are brutal. A pest hits the crop, the global price collapses. After all the labor, the money barely covers school fees. Now imagine that Alma hears about something new. An extension worker from the Agriculture Ministry or a local cooperative leader visits her village and talks about bamboo. Not as decoration, not as fence posts, but as a crop the new refinery will pay for, season after season. The soil on part of her land is tired. Maize yields are dropping. The idea of planting a hardy crop that comes back year after year starts to make sense. She joins with a group of neighbors, many of them women, to form a cooperative. Together, they receive training on how to plant bamboo, space it, manage it, and harvest it sustainably. The cooperative signs a supply agreement with a middle-mile company that collects bamboo from multiple communities and delivers it to processing hubs feeding the refinery. For Ama, the details are less important than the reality. For the first time, someone is offering her a predictable contract instead of a gamble on volatile international prices. Then there is Kojo, 28 years old, a chemical engineering graduate from a Ghanaian university. He has spent the last 2 years sending applications to oil companies and industrial plants without much success. Many of his classmates dream of getting scholarships to study abroad or visas to Europe because that is where they believe real industry is. Ghana in their minds is a place to be proud of, but not a place that offers cutting-edge work. The day Kojo hears that a large biorefinery is being built just a few hours from his hometown, it feels almost unreal. A facility that needs process engineers, fuel analysts, safety managers, maintenance teams, control room operators, and lab technicians. A place where his degree is not just a piece of paper, but a key to a career. Suddenly, the idea of staying in Ghana is not a compromise. It is an opportunity to help build something new. Around Ama and Kojo, others are pulled into the orbit of bamboo. Truck drivers who will haul stalks from plantations to processing centers. Welders and carpenters who will help expand the facility. information technology specialists who will keep the plant systems running securely, food vendors who will set up stalls outside the factory gates as thousands of workers come and go. $1 billion does not just buy buildings. It sets off a chain reaction of economic activity. On the government side, the appeal is clear. A bamboo value chain promises rural jobs, export earnings, and a way to reduce long-term dependence on imported fossil fuels. Officials talk about connecting the project to a broader vision of a 24-hour economy, with processing and logistics running day and night. For a country often squeezed by debt and trade deficits, a project that can generate high-value exports while lifting incomes at the village level is politically and economically attractive. But as all of these hopes gather, a harder edge to the story emerges. Every new industrial boom, whether it was rubber, palm oil, sugar, or cocoa, has come with a cost. Land lost, power imbalances, environmental harm, or new forms of dependency. Bamboo might be green and fast-growing, but it is not magic. If the incentives are wrong, it can become another way to squeeze communities and landscapes. So we have to ask the question that many glossy brochures avoid. In chasing this green gold, what risks might Ghana be walking into? One of the first worries is land. If a refinery needs a steady large supply of bamboo every year, the pressure to convert land into bamboo plantations will be intense. What happens if, driven by contracts and short-term profits, farmers start ripping out food crops and native vegetation to plant nothing but bamboo? The very thing that makes bamboo attractive from an industrial point of view, its speed, its resilience, its predictability, also makes it attractive as a single crop obsession. You do not need a long memory to see how this can go wrong. West Africa has lived through boom and bust cycles before. Cocoa, palm oil, and rubber have all left scars where forests used to stand. If bamboo becomes another miracle crop pushed without careful planning, it could repeat the same story under a greener label. The question then becomes, will Ghana set clear rules to prevent bamboo from swallowing the wrong lands, or will the market decide? Then there is the matter of who holds the technology. The core processes that turn bamboo into aviation fuel and advanced chemicals are not Ghanaian inventions. They belong to global companies with decades of research behind them. That is not a sin. This is how industrial partnerships work all over the world. But it matters for power. If the refinery relies on licensed technology, proprietary catalysts, and foreign engineering support, then part of its fate sits in boardrooms far outside Accra. Imagine a future where political tensions rise, regulations change, or corporate strategies shift. What happens if a key technology partner decides to renegotiate terms, raise fees, or pull back? Does Ghana have a plan to localize skills and potentially adapt or replace these technologies over time? Or will it always be dialing an international number when something critical breaks down? The third layer of unease is money. $1.3 billion is not loose change. It comes from a mix of equity, loans, and perhaps public support. The details matter. Interest rates, grace periods, guarantees, tax holidays, and revenue-sharing formulas. If the financing is unbalanced, Ghana could find itself in a familiar trap, hosting a grand project that looks impressive on television while most of the profits flow elsewhere, and much of the risk stays at home. So we are left looking at a complex picture. On one side, a chance to restore land, create jobs, and carve out a place in the global green economy. On the other side, the possibility of new vulnerabilities wrapped in the language of sustainability. It all comes down to one pivotal question. Is Ghana truly using bamboo to free itself from old patterns of dependence, or is it building a glittering green factory on foundations it does not fully control? The honest answer is that nothing is guaranteed, but there are signs that Ghana and its partners are at least aware of the pitfalls and are trying to design around them. Start with ownership and location. This refinery is not a foreign enclave dropped behind a fence with minimal local involvement. It is being led by a regional industrial developer headquartered on the continent, working in partnership with the state and international firms. That may sound technical, but it matters. When decisions are made closer to the communities affected, there is at least a better chance that local interests will be heard. Then look at the business model. The project is not built on exporting raw bamboo. It is built on exporting refined products, sustainable aviation fuel and green chemicals that command much higher prices. That means a larger slice of the value chain sits in Ghana. The processing, the quality control, the logistics, the negotiation of contracts with airlines and manufacturers. The country is not just a farm, it is a factory and a hub. Critics from abroad could still say, "We have seen big plans like this before. Do you really have the electricity, the roads, the governance, the maintenance culture to keep such a plant running? Or will it become another white elephant?" These are valid concerns. Ghana does struggle with power supply and infrastructure, but the technologies being deployed here are not untested science projects. The biorefining processes have been demonstrated in other countries. The partners involved have real track records, and they have an incentive to protect their reputations by making the plant work. Inside Ghana and across Africa, skepticism takes a different tone. Some people worry that this will be an isolated bubble of high-tech activity that barely touches the rest of the economy, a shiny project leaders point at while everyday problems remain. That is a fair fear. If the refinery were to import most of its feedstock, workforce, and services from outside the local area, its benefits would be thin. But by its very nature, a bamboo-based refinery cannot operate without local roots. It needs reliable streams of bamboo from thousands of farmers spread across multiple regions. It needs local transport, storage, and pre-processing. It needs technicians and engineers who know the local context and can stay for the long haul. In other words, if the project succeeds, it almost has to drag a wide network of Ghanaian workers and businesses along with it. Still, there is a bigger game at play than one refinery, one country, or one balance sheet. What makes Amaaba so interesting is what it signals. It shows that an African nation can look at a resource most people ignore, match it with global technology, and step into the center of a future-oriented industry instead of waiting to be invited in. The question is whether that example will remain a one-off story or whether it will become a blueprint others follow. If you zoom out from Ghana to a map of Africa, the possibilities begin to multiply. West Africa alone has vast areas of degraded land that could host bamboo or other fast-growing biomass crops without displacing food production. Other regions have their own underused resources, agricultural residues, invasive species, and non-food crops that could feed biorefineries. The point is not that every country should copy Ghana exactly. The point is that Amaaba proves something important. A green industrial project of this scale is not off limits to the continent. Imagine for a moment what happens if other African countries decide to adapt the model. A coastal state combines bamboo, sugarcane bagasse, and other residues to supply its own SAF plant. A country in East Africa marries biorefining to its geothermal power, using clean electricity to drive low-carbon chemical production. Another country ties biomass projects to large-scale reforestation, using industrial demand to finance land restoration and erosion control. In each case, the essential message is the same. Africa moves from simply supplying raw inputs, crude oil, raw minerals, unprocessed crops, to selling higher-value, climate-aligned products that the world increasingly needs. That shift does not just change trade statistics, it changes bargaining power. When airlines, chemical companies, and governments rely on African suppliers to meet their own climate commitments, the conversation at the negotiating table looks very different. Back in Ghana, the human face of this future might be someone like Nana, a woman in her early 50s who leads a bamboo cooperative. For years, she juggled small trading activities, buying and selling goods in modest quantities, always one bad harvest or one medical bill away from trouble. Joining the cooperative was, at first, just a practical decision. It offered a chance at steady work. Over time, as the cooperative signed contracts, received training, and built a relationship with the supply chain feeding the refinery, Nana's role changed. She was no longer only worrying about her own income. She was helping dozens of other women earn reliable pay from planting, tending, and harvesting bamboo. For her, the refinery is not an abstract symbol. It is a buyer she can negotiate with, a partner she can hold accountable, and a reason to see her rural community as part of a larger industrial story. For Ghana as a whole, Amaaba can become a kind of mirror. It reflects the country's best instincts, creativity, resilience, willingness to try new paths. It also reflects its risks, the temptation to cut corners, the pressure to sign deals quickly, the danger of overlooking those who live closest to the land. How the story unfolds will say a great deal about what kind of future Ghana wants, not just what kind of fuel it produces. And for the broader African continent, this is a test case with meaning far beyond bamboo. If one country can take a neglected resource, pair it with advanced technology, and carve out a niche in the crowded competitive field of green energy, then the old excuse, Africa isn't ready, starts to look very thin. As we come to the end of this journey, it is worth stepping back and looking at the larger picture. At the national level, Amaaba is a bet that Ghana can redefine itself from a supplier of raw materials to a hub of green industrial activity. If the refinery delivers on its promises, it could generate export earnings, reduce pressure on forests, restore damaged land, and keep more skilled workers at home. It will not solve every problem, but it could tilt the country's trajectory in a better direction. At the continental level, the refinery is a signal flare. It says to Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa, and others, this is possible. Not easy, not risk-free, but possible. Africa does not have to stand at the back of the line waiting for rich nations to finish building their own green industries. It can step forward, using its own resources, its own land, and its own talent in partnership with others, but not under their shadow. At the global level, the implications may be the most surprising. For decades, there has been an unspoken hierarchy in energy and industry. Wealthy countries design the high-value technologies. Manufacturing giants churn out products at scale. Africa ships out raw stuff and hopes for the best. A successful bamboo refinery in Ghana chips away at that hierarchy. It introduces a new source of sustainable fuel and chemicals that the rest of the world cannot easily replace if it is serious about climate promises. Without grand speeches or dramatic announcements, the lines of power begin to shift. Airlines looking for stable SAF supply will have to consider contracts with West African partners. Companies that once saw Africa only as a place to source cheap inputs will have to reckon with it as a producer of sophisticated, value-added goods. Governments that have long spoken about Africa as a beneficiary of climate finance may find themselves negotiating with African producers who hold something essential. If you are watching this from the United States, especially if you are over 50, you have lived through multiple energy revolutions. You have seen oil shocks, gas lines, the rise and fall of coal, the promises and disappointments of shale, the slow march of renewables. You know that every change in the fuel mix reshapes politics, economics, and everyday life in ways no one fully predicts. What is happening in that quiet bamboo field in Ghana is the start of another such change, just on a different stage. This time, Africa is not simply reacting to technologies and rules made elsewhere. It is trying in fits and starts to write a few of those rules itself. That does not mean it will get everything right. Mistakes will be made. Projects may stumble, but the direction of travel matters. So we are left with one last question, bigger than Amaaba, bigger than Ghana, bigger even than bamboo. If Africa can do this with one overlooked plant, what happens when the entire continent starts believing in its own power with the same seriousness? Whether the resource is sun, wind, geothermal heat, agricultural residues, or the minds of its young people. If that possibility intrigues you, if it challenges the way you have been taught to see Africa's place in the world, then do not let this be the last story you hear. There are more chapters coming about digital economies, about rare minerals, about cultural power and political voice. If you want to follow those stories as they unfold, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss them. Because as these fields of bamboo grow, as pipes and tanks rise beside them, one truth becomes harder and harder to ignore. Africa is no longer waiting for permission. In the age of green energy, just as in the age of digital networks, Africa bows to no one.